You're not the bride I wanted.
I placed the crown jewels on the table with hands that did not tremble. The diamond tiara that had graced the heads of queens for 3 centuries. The sapphire necklace that was said to hold the tears of the first Duchess of Thornwood. The royal scepter, symbol of all that I was expected to become. I arranged them carefully, precisely, the way I had been taught to arrange everything in my life, with perfect grace and no regard for my own desires. Then I removed my engagement ring and set it beside them. "You are not the bride I wanted." His words still echoed in my ears. Spoken not in private, where cruelty might at least have the dignity of discretion, but in the great hall, before 200 guests assembled to celebrate our impending union. Spoken with the casual contempt of a man who had never been denied anything, who had never considered that his words might carry consequences. He had wanted Lady Arabella Sinclair. Golden-haired, empty-headed, daughter of his mother's dearest friend. He had made that abundantly clear throughout our 6-month engagement, comparing me unfavorably to her at every opportunity, reminding me that I was a political necessity rather than a romantic choice. But tonight, he had gone too far. Tonight, with Arabella simpering at his elbow and the court watching with hungry eyes, he had announced that he intended to petition the crown for an annulment before the wedding even took place. That he would marry for love rather than duty. That I, Princess Marguerite of Valdoria, daughter of one of Europe's oldest royal houses, was not good enough for him. He had humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered. And now I was going to disappear. I pulled my traveling cloak tight around my shoulders and stepped through the balcony doors into the cold night air. Below me, the castle grounds stretched toward the forest that marked the boundary of the Duke's lands. Beyond that forest lay the border. Beyond the border lay a world where no one knew my face or my name. I did not look back at the jewels gleaming in the moonlight. I did not look back at anything. If the Duke of Thornwood did not want me, then he could explain to both our kingdoms why the alliance had shattered. He could explain why a princess had vanished into the night, leaving behind everything except her dignity. He could live with the consequences of his cruelty. I was done living with it for him. If you want to know where I ran and what I became when I stopped being a princess, hit that subscribe button right now. We are a tiny channel with a massive dream, fighting to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Every single one of you who joins helps us grow. Stay with me. This story is about to become something you never expected. I had never been outside the castle walls without an escort. 23 years of life, and I had never walked through a forest alone, never slept beneath the stars, never made a single decision without consulting advisors, chaperones, or the endless parade of people whose job it was to ensure that Princess Marguerite remained precisely what she was supposed to be. Now I was stumbling through undergrowth in the dark, my fine silk gown snagging on branches, my impractical court shoes sliding on moss and fallen leaves. I was cold, frightened, utterly unprepared for the reality of escape. And I had never felt more alive. The forest was vast, I knew that from maps I had studied during my education. It stretched for 30 miles before reaching the border between Thornwood and the neighboring territory of Blackmoor. If I could reach Blackmoor by dawn, I could find passage on a merchant ship heading south. I had coin sewn into the lining of my cloak. A precaution I had taken months ago, when I first began to suspect that my engagement might not end in marriage. I was not entirely unprepared. Just mostly unprepared. The night sound surrounded me, owls calling, small creatures rustling in the undergrowth, the distant howl of something I chose not to identify. I kept moving, using the stars to navigate, grateful for the astronomy lessons that had seemed so pointless when I was a girl dreaming of ballrooms rather than survival. By the time the sky began to lighten, I had reached the border. Or rather, I had reached a small village that straddled the border, a collection of humble cottages where people lived their lives without caring which duke or prince claimed dominion over their patch of earth. I found an inn, paid for a room with coins that made the innkeeper's eyes widen, and collapsed onto a bed that was hard and lumpy and utterly perfect. I slept until evening. When I woke, I was no longer Princess Marguerite. I was no one at all. I sold my silk gown to a merchant's wife who asked no questions but paid generously. I used the money to buy practical traveling clothes, a wool dress, sturdy boots, a warm cloak with no embroidery or ornamentation. I cut my hair short with a kitchen knife, transforming the elaborate coiffure that had taken servants hours to create into something plain and unremarkable. When I looked in the mirror, I did not recognize myself. Good. The next weeks passed in a blur of travel. I moved from village to village, always heading south, always careful not to stay in one place long enough to attract attention. I worked for my keep when my coins ran low, washing dishes in taverns, mending clothes for merchants' wives, teaching children to read in exchange for meals. I discovered that I was useful. This was a revelation. As a princess, I had been ornamental. My value lay in my bloodline, my connections, my potential as a bargaining chip in political negotiations. No one had ever asked me to do anything genuinely productive. No one had ever suggested that I might have skills beyond embroidery and conversation. But in the real world, the world outside castle walls, I could work. I could contribute. I could earn my own way. I found myself smiling at strange moments. While scrubbing pots in a cramped kitchen. While walking through marketplaces where no one bowed or curtsied. While eating simple food that I had helped to prepare. I was free. And I was happy. 3 months after my disappearance, I arrived in Santander, a port city on the southern coast, known for its merchants and its ships and its willingness to ask no questions of travelers seeking passage. I found lodging in a respectable boarding house, took work as a translator for a shipping company my education had included for languages, another skill I had never expected to use, and began to build a life. A real life. My own life. I thought I had escaped entirely. I was wrong. We are 3 months into Marguerite's new life, but the past is about to catch up. If you are watching from somewhere around the world, drop a comment and tell me where. I read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now. We need your help to grow this channel, and every subscriber brings us closer to our dream. The Duke of Thornwood did not take my disappearance gracefully. I learned this from the newspapers that arrived with the merchant ships. Papers from every kingdom in Europe, filled with speculation about the vanished princess. The scandal had rocked both royal houses. My father was furious. The Duke's mother was mortified. International relations were strained to the breaking point. And the Duke himself? According to the papers, he had launched a massive search. Hundreds of men combing the forests, rewards offered in every city, my portrait distributed to every port and border crossing. He wanted me found. Not because he loved me. Not because he regretted his cruelty. But because my disappearance had made him look foolish. A man who could not keep track of his own bride was a man who could not be trusted with a kingdom. His reputation was in tatters. I smiled when I read that, alone in my small room, and felt a satisfaction that was perhaps uncharitable but deeply earned. I also began to be more careful. I changed boarding houses, moving to a smaller establishment in a less fashionable part of the city. I adopted a different name, Maria Santos, a common enough identity to disappear within. I stopped working for the shipping company and found employment as a governess for a merchant family, teaching their daughters the skills I had once taken for granted. I built walls around my new life and hoped they would be strong enough. They were not. 6 months after my disappearance, I returned to my boarding house after a day of lessons to find a man waiting in the common room. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged, moderately dressed, the kind of person who would fade into any crowd. But his eyes were sharp. And they fixed on me with recognition. "Maria Santos?" he asked. "Yes?" Also known as Princess Margarita Valdoria. My blood ran cold. His name was Heinrich, and he was the Duke's most trusted investigator. I considered running. The door was behind me, the street beyond it, the maze of alleys where I might lose myself. But something in his expression stopped me, a weariness that seemed at odds with his mission. "I am not here to force you back," he said quietly, once we had moved to a private corner. "I was sent to find you. I have found you. What happens next is your choice." "My choice?" The Duke made it clear I had no choices. The Duke has changed. Heinrich paused. Or perhaps he has not changed, but he has been forced to confront the consequences of his behavior. The alliance with Valdoria has collapsed. Lady Arabella Sinclair, upon learning the truth of how he treated you, refused his proposal quite publicly. His mother has not spoken to him in 4 months. He smiled grimly. He is learning that cruelty has a price. Good. He deserves to suffer. Perhaps. But he also asked me to deliver a message, should I find you. I do not want his messages. Hear it anyway. And then decide. Heinrich drew a folded paper from his coat. He wrote it himself. I watched him struggle with the words for hours. I did not want to take it. I did not want to give the Duke any space in the life I had built. But curiosity overcame resistance, and I accepted the paper. His handwriting was shaky, nothing like the bold, confident script I remembered from our brief correspondence during the engagement. I was wrong. I was cruel. I was the worst version of myself, and I inflicted that version on you without thought or mercy. You deserved better. You deserved a man who recognized your worth, and instead you received a boy who was too immature to understand what he was being offered. I am not asking you to return. I have no right to ask anything of you. But I wanted you to know that I am sorry. Truly sorry. And that if you ever want to come back. Not to the engagement, which I have formally dissolved, but to society, to your family, to the life that was taken from you, or I will do everything in my power to make that possible. You left the crown jewels on my table. They meant nothing to you. I understand now that they should have meant nothing to me as well. What mattered was you. And I was too blind to see it. Alexander. I read the letter 3 times. Then I burned it. Heinrich stayed in Santander for 3 days, waiting for my response. I gave him none. He eventually departed, presumably to report that I was alive, well, and utterly unwilling to return. I did not know what consequences would follow, whether the Duke would send more persuasive messengers, whether my father would demand my return, whether the fragile piece of my new life would shatter entirely. But nothing happened. Weeks passed. Months. The newspapers stopped mentioning the vanished princess. The search was officially called off. The Duke, according to reports, had retreated to his country estate and was refusing all visitors. I should have felt triumphant. He was suffering, as he deserved to suffer. His cruelty had cost him everything. Instead, I felt hollow. I had built a new life. I had proven that I could survive on my own, that I was more than a political pawn. But that new life felt incomplete somehow. The satisfaction of my escape had faded, replaced by a quiet loneliness that I could not quite identify. I was free. But freedom, I was learning, was not the same as happiness. One evening, as I walked along the harbor watching ships prepare for distant voyages, I found myself wondering what it would feel like to go home. Not to the castle, not to the life I had fled, but to the land of my birth. The mountains and rivers of Valdoria. The language I had spoken before I learned any other. The places where my mother had walked before she died. I missed something I could not name. And I began to wonder whether running away had been an escape, or simply a different kind of prison. This moment right here, this is where Marguerite starts to question everything. If you are feeling this story, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every share helps us reach new people. And please subscribe. We are building something beautiful here, and we cannot do it without you. A year after my disappearance, I received an unexpected visitor. Not the Duke's investigator this time. Not any representative of the Thornwood Court. Instead, the woman who appeared at my boarding house was someone I had not seen since childhood, Lady Caroline Ashworth, my mother's closest friend. She was older now, grey-haired and careful in her movements, but her eyes held the same warmth I remembered from my earliest years. Marguerite. She spoke my true name softly, as though it were fragile. May I come in? I led her to my small room, offered her the single chair while I sat on the bed, and waited for whatever message she had come to deliver. Your father is dying. I had expected many things. Not that. He has been ill for months. The physicians give him weeks at most. Lady Caroline's voice was gentle but direct. He has asked to see you. Not to force you home, not to lecture you about duty. Simply to see you one more time before he dies. Why did he not send an official messenger? Because he knew you would refuse. He asked me to come instead, the woman who held you at your christening, who watched you take your first steps, who was there the night your mother died. She paused. He is not the same man he was, Marguerite. Your disappearance changed him, just as the Duke's cruelty changed you. He blamed himself. He had arranged the match, pushed you into it, ignored your unhappiness because he was too focused on political advantage. He should blame himself. Yes. He should. And he does. She leaned forward. I am not asking you to forgive him. I am asking you to give him a chance to apologize before it is too late. After that, you can return to this life if you choose. Or you can reclaim your place in Valdoria. The choice will be yours. I was silent for a long moment. And the Duke has nothing to do with this. The engagement is dissolved, the alliance abandoned, the connection between your families severed completely. You would be returning as a free woman, not as anyone's promised bride. I thought about my father. The stern king who had rarely smiled, who had spoken to me more often about duty than about love, who had traded me to a foreign duke like cargo. I thought about the years of resentment I had carried, the certainty that he saw me as a political tool rather than a daughter. But I also thought about the few moments when he had been different. The night my mother died, when he had held me while I wept. The morning of my 16th birthday, when he had given me her jewelry and told me stories about her that no one else remembered. The look on his face when I had left for Thornwood, something that might have been grief, quickly hidden. He was dying. And I had not said goodbye. I will come, I said. The journey to Valdoria took 2 weeks by ship and carriage. Lady Caroline accompanied me, a steady presence that asked nothing and demanded nothing. We spoke little during the journey, but her company was comforting, a connection to the world I had left behind, without the weight of expectation. The palace was exactly as I remembered it, grey stone against green mountains, towers reaching toward clouds that seemed close enough to touch. I had played in those courtyards as a child. I had learned to dance in those ballrooms. I had dreamed of escape from those walls, never imagining that escape would feel so much like loss. My father was in his chambers, too weak to rise from his bed. I barely recognized him. The stern king who had commanded armies was gone. In his place lay a frail old man, his skin papery, his breathing labored, his eyes the only part of him that remained alert. Marguerite. He said my name like a blessing. You came. Lady Caroline said you were dying. I could not. I struggled for words. I could not let you go without seeing you. You had every right to stay away. After what I did. The match I forced on you, the cruelty I ignored. Father. Let me finish. I may not have the strength for this conversation again. He reached out, and I took his hand, bones beneath skin, no strength left. I was wrong. I saw you as a piece on a political board rather than my daughter. Your mother would have been ashamed of me. She would have fought against that marriage, would have protected you, would have put your happiness above any alliance. She is not here. No. And in her absence, I became something she would not have recognized. A tear slid down his weathered cheek. I am sorry, Marguerite. For all of it. For the engagement, for the Duke, for pushing you so far that you felt you had no choice but to run. I had prepared anger. I had rehearsed speeches of recrimination, lists of grievances, all the wounds I had carried for more than a year. Instead, looking at my father's face, broken, remorseful, dying, I found only grief. I forgive you, I said. My father died 3 weeks later. I was at his bedside, holding his hand, when he took his final breath. The moment was quiet, almost peaceful, nothing like the dramatic deaths I had read about in stories. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. I became Queen of Valdoria. The title fell on me unexpectedly. I had assumed my father's distant cousin would inherit, as I was unmarried and female and my parents had produced no sons. But Valdorian law, I learned, was more progressive than I had realized. The eldest child inherited regardless of gender, provided they claimed the throne within a year of the monarch's death. And I had claimed it. I had not planned to. I had intended to return to Santander after my father's funeral, to resume the quiet life I had built. But standing in the throne room, wearing my mother's crown, looking at the faces of people who had known me since childhood, I realized that running had served its purpose. It had taught me who I was. It had proven that I could survive on my own terms. Now it was time to see what else I could become. The early months of my reign were challenging. I had been trained for politics but not governance. I understood diplomacy but not administration. I made mistakes, some minor, some significant, and learned from each one. But I also discovered strengths I had not known I possessed. I was a good listener, which made me popular with advisors who had been ignored by my father. I was practical, which allowed me to cut through elaborate court rituals to the substance beneath. I was compassionate, which earned me the loyalty of people who had expected a cold ruler. I was a good queen. And I was alone. The loneliness I had felt in Santander returned, sharper now. There were people around me constantly, servants and advisors, nobles and diplomats, but none who knew the real me. The woman who had washed dishes in taverns. The woman who had taught children to read for the price of a meal. The woman who had burned a duke's apology letter and felt both satisfaction and regret. I was surrounded, and I was solitary. Until one evening, 3 years after my disappearance, when the Duke of Thornwood appeared at my court. 3 years have passed, and now he is here. If your heart is racing right now, you are exactly where I want you. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell for notifications, and make sure you do not miss what happens next. We are so close to our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. He was different. I noticed it immediately, before he spoke a single word. The arrogant tilt of his chin was gone. The casual cruelty that had lived in his eyes had been replaced by something more complicated, something that looked almost like pain. He was thinner, too. And there were grey streaks in his hair that had not been there 3 years ago. Your Majesty. He bowed low, lower than protocol required. Thank you for receiving me. I almost did not. I remained on my throne, maintaining the height advantage. My advisors recommended turning you away at the border. I would have understood if you had. Then why did you come? Because I owed you an apology in person. He straightened but kept his eyes lowered. The letter I sent was inadequate. Words on paper cannot convey the depth of my regret. I needed to stand before you and tell you myself. You have traveled across 2 kingdoms to apologize. I have traveled across 2 kingdoms because 3 years ago, I destroyed something precious through arrogance and cruelty. I have spent every day since then trying to understand how I became that man, and how to become someone else. He finally met my eyes. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking for anything. I simply needed you to know that I see now what I could not see then. That you deserve better. That you were better, better than me, better than my court, better than the cage I was building for you. And Lady Arabella? The bride you actually wanted. Married a viscount last year. They seem happy. He smiled wryly. She made it very clear, when she rejected me, that she wanted nothing to do with a man who could treat a woman as I had treated you. She said you had more dignity in your departure than I had shown in my entire life. She was not wrong. No. She was not. We regarded each other across the throne room, 2 people scarred by a shared history, trying to navigate an uncertain present. Why are you really here, Your Grace? Because I have spent 3 years improving myself. Learning to be kinder, more thoughtful, more worthy of the position I hold. And the entire time, there was one question I could not answer. He took a breath. Whether I could ever atone for what I did to you. Whether there was any path forward that did not lead to eternal regret. And you thought coming here would answer that question. I thought seeing you, seeing what you have become, might help me understand what I destroyed. I heard reports of your reign. A queen who listens. A ruler who cares for her people. A woman who transformed herself from political pawn to genuine leader. His voice softened. I wanted to witness that transformation for myself. And perhaps, selfishly, I wanted you to witness mine. He stayed for a week. Against my advisor's recommendations, against my own better judgment, I allowed the Duke to remain at my court. We did not spend time alone, that would have been inappropriate and unwise, but we spoke during formal dinners, passed each other in corridors, observed each other from careful distances. I watched him interact with my servants. He was unfailingly courteous, treating them as people rather than furniture. I watched him converse with my advisors. He asked questions and listened to answers, showing genuine interest in perspectives other than his own. I watched him, and I began to believe that he had changed. This was dangerous. I knew it was dangerous. The man who had humiliated me, who had driven me to flee my own engagement, who had caused an international incident through his casual cruelty. That man could not simply transform through willpower and regret. People did not change so fundamentally. But I also knew something else. I had changed. The princess who had accepted an arranged marriage without protest, who had endured 6 months of humiliation rather than speaking up, who had defined herself entirely through her relationship to others, that princess no longer existed. In her place was a queen who had scrubbed pots and taught children and built a life from nothing. If I could change so completely, perhaps others could too. On his final evening, the Duke requested a private audience. We met in my study, a small room lined with books, warmed by a fire, intimate without being inappropriate. I sat behind my desk, he stood before it, his posture a mixture of formality and vulnerability. I am leaving tomorrow. I know. Before I go, I need to say something. Something that may offend you, that you have every right to reject and despise. He met my eyes. I have fallen in love with you. I went very still. Not with the princess you were. Not with the queen you have become. With you, the woman who left everything behind rather than accept mistreatment. The woman who built a new life from nothing. The woman who forgave her dying father and took a throne she never expected. His voice was rough. I know I have no right to these feelings. I know my past disqualifies me from any consideration. But I could not leave without telling you the truth. You did not love me when we were engaged. No. I was too blind and too arrogant to see anything beyond my own desires. But watching you from afar these 3 years, seeing who you truly were all along, I learned to see. Too late, perhaps. Almost certainly too late. He bowed his head. I am not asking for anything. I simply could not carry this secret home with me. I rose from my desk and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains where I had played as a child. When you spoke those words, "You are not the bride I wanted," I felt something die inside me. Not love, because I had never loved you. But hope. The hope that my life might contain something other than duty and obligation. I turned to face him. You killed that hope. And then, in running away, I found it again. I found myself. I became someone I actually wanted to be. I know. And I am sorrier for that than for anything else. That you had to flee to find yourself, because I was too cruel to let you be yourself while you stayed. 3 years is a long time. Long enough for me to build a kingdom. Long enough for you to build a new character, if your transformation is genuine. I paused. How do I know you will not revert? How do I know the kind man I have observed this week is real? You cannot know. Not for certain. All I can offer is time. He stepped closer. Stay in contact with me. Exchange letters. Let me prove, slowly and steadily, that I am who I claim to be. If you ever doubt, end the correspondence. If you ever feel manipulated, send me away. But give me the chance to demonstrate my change. That is all I ask. We exchanged letters for 2 years. They began formal, diplomatic communications between neighboring rulers, careful and appropriate. But over time, they became personal. We wrote about our childhoods, our fears, our hopes. We debated philosophy and politics, shared jokes and frustrations, built the kind of relationship we should have had during our engagement. I came to know Alexander, not the Duke who had humiliated me, but the man he had become. Thoughtful. Kind. Genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. Willing to admit his mistakes and learn from them. I came to trust him. And eventually, I came to love him. Our wedding was nothing like the first engagement. There was no elaborate court spectacle, no political maneuvering, no crown jewels or formal announcements. We married quietly, in the chapel of my palace, with only those who truly mattered in attendance. I wore a simple gown. He wore no ceremonial insignia. We spoke vows we had written ourselves, promises of equality, partnership, and the kind of love that was built rather than assumed. When he placed the ring on my finger, I remembered the last time I had removed a ring. The night I had left everything behind. The night I had become someone new. I do not deserve you, he whispered. Perhaps not. But you have earned me. And that matters more. 20 years later, we stood together on the balcony of our shared palace, 2 kingdoms united not through political arrangement but through genuine partnership. Our children played in the courtyard below, free and happy in a way neither of us had been at their age. Do you ever think about that night? Alexander asked. The night you left the jewels and vanished. Sometimes. Usually when I need to remember who I am, and who I refuse to ever be again. And what do you remember? I remember that the most powerful thing I ever did was walk away. I remember that I had to lose everything to find myself. And I remember, I turned to face him. That you had to lose me to find yourself. The most painful and necessary lesson of my life. It brought us here. Yes. He pulled me close. Every mistake, every cruelty, every year of regret, it all led to this moment. To you, to us, to everything we have built together. I leaned into his embrace, watching our children laugh in the evening light. I had left the crown jewels on a table and vanished into the night. And from that act of desperate courage, I had found something worth more than any jewels. I had found myself. And then, against all odds, I had found love. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. You are the reason we do this. If it touched your heart, please subscribe. We are fighting so hard to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you makes a difference. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that walking away can be the beginning, not the end. Comment where you are watching from. I read every single one, and I want to say hello to you. Until next time, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing is what comes after.